Hello everyone, welcome to day 3 of Java coding lessons. Today we will be covering control and loop statements. If you've ever heard of if, else if, while, or for, this is where they really come into play. And they sound really complicated, but I will try to simplify them as much as possible. So, this is a little piece of code we have. You have a class or titled control. So somewhere on your computer, there's a file called control.java. And we have our main function, the first function that runs when we run this code. It has an if statement, which means if 1 is less than 2, the things inside the parentheses, if that is true, it'll print something out. Otherwise, if 1 is not less than 2, it'll check again. If is 1 greater than 2? If that is true, then it'll print out this code. Otherwise, if none of those are true, print out the last piece of code. And so, to go into a little deeper, the if statement takes a Boolean type input. And if you remember what a Boolean is, it means it means either true or false. It's a yes or no. And so you put that inside the parentheses. Now, if the stuff inside the parentheses is true, it'll do the stuff inside the curly brackets. If it's not true, then do something else, or don't do anything at all. Now, this is used to control the path of the code. That's why it's called a control statement. It can also be paired with else or else if statements in order to create different solutions and check for different things. So if we go back into our example, we know because 1 is less than 2, it'll only print out math makes sense. It won't print out math doesn't make sense or math makes nothing makes sense because 1 is less than 2. Now if 1 wasn't less than 2, and but 1 was greater than 2, it would print out math makes no sense. And if neither of those were true somehow, and 1 equals 2, then it'll print out nothing makes sense. Okay? So if you have questions, go ahead and ask. Now, it takes in a thing called a Boolean operator. Now, all a Boolean operator is, it's two things that will give you true or false, a Boolean type variable. So we have less than and greater than. Those are both Boolean operators. And we have the equal sign. If 1 equals 1, then print true. It'll have a value of true. Thing is, we can't use the regular equal sign. Why? Because our computer will think we're putting the number on the right into the number on the left, to a variable that's the number on the left. And so in order to differentiate that equal sign and this equal sign, the comparison equal sign, for the comparison equal sign, we use two equal signs. It's kind of like using two backslashes in order to type one backslash. We also have less than or equals to, and greater than or equals to, and also not equals to. And the exclamation mark means not. You'll see that very often, not equals. You also have, you can do this with floats as well. And in order to do it with strings, you actually have to use a whole other function. It's called dot equals. So if you type in a string, Bob, and then say dot equals another string, it'll tell you whether or not those two are equal. Now, and or. All the two ampersand signs means is and the two straight lines, all they mean is or. And means that both the thing on the left and the thing on the right have to be true in order for it to be true. Or means either of them have to be true in order for it to return true. So 1 is less than 2 and 1 is greater than 2. Well, only one of those can be true. The other one has to be false. So it returns false. And 1 is less than 2. But 1 is not greater than 2. So it returns false. 1 is less than 2 or 1 is greater than 2. 1 is less than 2. That gives you true. But 1 is not greater than 2, which gives you false. That means because one of those is true, at least one of those is true, it will return true. Now, if you put all you have to do now is put all those Boolean operators that will give you true or false inside the if statement, and it'll do something based on that. Now the else if statement. So if your grade, we created a little variable called my grade, and if it's greater than 90, you will have an A. Otherwise, if it's greater than 80, you'll have a B. And if it's none of those, you'll have a C or lower. And so you can put that inside else and else ifs and else's in order to check what your grade is. So you have to be careful, because if the first statement is true, you won't see any of the other statements. So let's check this slide again. If my grade is greater than 90, which it is, it'll print out an A. Now because if the if statement already worked, it won't check these. So it won't print a B or a C. All it is, it will only print the A. So make sure you don't want it to do multiple of these things. Only one statement, depending on what's inside the if statement. If that doesn't make sense, we'll see it in later examples. Now, a while loop. What a while loop does, and I'll just let's look at the code we have here. So we declared a variable, a counter variable, that starts at 0. It could be it can be named anything. It could be number of chickens, integer number of chickens equals 0. Now while that number of chickens, while that variable, that integer variable is less than 10, you can it'll increase counter by 1. We've seen that before with assignment operators. It'll increase itself by 1 and then print out itself. So it'll and at the very end it can say I can count to 9. So I will go ahead and open up our wonderful codiva.io compiler. And this is our previous project. We'll start a new one. We'll call it control. Go ahead and create it. Now we're going to name our file while loops. You can name your file anything. This is just for me to organize it a little better. And .java. Make sure you include the .java, otherwise it won't work. You don't have to worry about directory. It'll create itself. And now we can start using our code. I will go ahead and copy this. Okay, again, never mind. I will write it out myself. Now the goal of this code is to use the while loop to count from 0 to 9. And we could use it to count from 1 to 10. But let's start with 0 to 9. We're going to start with our counter variable. Let's say we're counting sheep. So I'll say sheep. Yeah, I'll just say our number of sheep is 0 for now. Now I could say sheep plus equals 10, but that's not that's kind of boring. Or I could say sheep plus equals 1 10 times. Oh man, 10 times, but that will take way too long. How do you do that? Simpler. We have a while loop. All it does is it repeats things. It loops things. That's why it's called a loop function. So let me get rid of that. Let's start a while loop. While, what you put inside is a condition. It's again a Boolean operator or a Boolean type variable. If this is true, right? Then we'll do. If this is true, the things inside the parentheses is true. Do whatever's inside the curly brackets. So while the number of sheep we have is less than 10, we're going to increase sheep by 1, and we're going to print out stop print ln. We're going to print out the number of sheep we have, and at the very end we're going to print out we have a lot of sheep, or we have I think it's, yeah, we have 9 sheeps. Okay, 9 sheep. That's right? The plural for sheep is just sheep. Oh, I forgot a semicolon. Okay. Now let's run this. And you'll see in the console, once it loads, I'm lagging. Oh no. I mean, you'd expect this with my internet. Did I even click the run button? Oh, I did. Did I? Now I'm doubting myself. It's really taking that long? Weesh. Well, it will print out 0. Here, let's go through the while loop. Oh, let me try zooming in. Oh man, that's too close. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I think zooming in is a little better, so you can see a little clearer. So, sheep starts at 0, and as it goes into the while loop, sheep is less than 10, because 0 is less than 10. Now, because this is true, it'll go into the while loop. Sheep will increase itself by 1 with this statement, and then it'll print itself. Now, if it'll repeat again, it'll go back to the top and check. Sheep is now 1 because we increased it by 1. Is sheep less than 10 still? 1 is less than 10. So it'll increase itself by 1 and print itself out again. Now it'll keep doing that. It'll keep doing that until it gets to 9. And at 9, it'll increase itself to 10. Now, is 10 less than 10? No, 10 is equal to 10. So it can finally leave this loop. It'll leave the while loop and then go into this line. We have 9 sheep. Now, because it only prints itself if it's less than 10, we won't have it print out 10 sheep. Now, if you wanted to print out 10 sheep, all you have to do is change this to 11. Or you could do less than or equals to. Those are both solutions if you wanted to count 10 sheep. Now, this brings a great danger. What if inside the while loop, you have something that will always be true forever? You can really write just true in there. It'll repeat the loop inside forever. Now, your computer actually, and all compilers, have a built-in backup plan. What if they'll check if a while loop repeats like 6 million times. And if it repeats 6 million times, then it'll immediately stop your program. This is to prevent you from accidentally leaving it as true forever. So, if your code ever says, or the error message, any time if it says, traceback call error repeated too many times, you'll know that somewhere you didn't have your while loop end. So you want to make sure when you're building your while loop that it ends at some point. So again, all the while loop does is it repeats the stuff inside the curly brackets while the thing inside the parentheses is true. Now, again, you have to be careful. Make sure at some point the thing that is inside the parentheses becomes false. Otherwise, your code will repeat forever. So, the while loop is meant to make things simpler. If you're increasing sheep 10 times, instead of writing that out in your code, you can simplify it and just use a while loop. Yes, that is a lot of the time. Coding will have to do. The point of code is to make whatever you're coding a lot simpler. It's to decrease the amount of the semicolons and the amount of just letters you have to type. Okay, increment and decrement. All that means is increase by 1 and decrease by 1. Now, why we have this? It's because a lot of the time in coding, we will be counting. We will be adding things by 1 and decreasing by 1. And there's 3 ways to do that. The 3 easiest ways to do that. What we have shown you in the past is counter equals counter plus 1, right? Counter plus equals 1. And there's another one. Coders are so lazy that they don't even want to write counter plus equals 1. Instead, they write counter plus plus. Counter plus plus is the same thing as counter plus equals 1. It's just to change the value of an integer by a set amount, like 1 or 2 or 10, just the same amount. And all of these examples, you could do the same thing with minus equals counter minus 1, counter minus equals 1, or counter minus minus in my examples. They all do the same thing. It's just coders are really lazy and they like to decrease the amount of text they write. So you're going to have to get used to seeing these little abbreviations. Let's keep going. The for loop. The for loop, all it is, it's the while loop simplified even further. It's crunched it even further. Now, people say, well, then why will you use the while loop? Well, because the for loop, it's purely meant for counting. Here, in my next slide, it's only meant for counting and repeating things a certain amount of times. The while loop, if you don't know how many times you want to repeat it, then you'll usually use the while loop. Otherwise, you'll use the for loop for counting. All it is it's the while loop shrunken into one line. And here are the three parts, and I will show you these parts. It's initializing a variable to count with, declaring when the for loop stops, and declaring how you want to count the variable, how to increase it. So in my little example code right here, we have an integer. It's the counter variable. And if you remember the while loop, it has the same counter variable. Then, when do you, the condition, do you want this, when do you want this to continue if counter is less than 10? And how do you want to get to the next step? Or how do you want to increase the counter variable? We'll just increase it by 1, counter plus plus. And we'll print that out 10 times, and we'll print out I can count to 9. Now this code, which I will copy over here, I'll paste it right under so you can see all the similarities. So we have an initial counter, right? We have a variable that will store a 0 and then a 1, and then we'll change it one by one in order to count a certain number of times. Then, and it's the exact same line here. Then, while the sheep is less than 10, it's the exact same line here. The condition when you want the when you want this to repeat, if this is true, if counter is less than 10. Then we increase sheep by 1, and we could just change this to sheep plus plus, and it's the same exact thing, and we have that step here too. It's just increasing the counter variable, and then whatever left we want to do. We want to print out the counter, and we want to print out the sheep. These two examples are exactly the same because they share the same purpose. Now, for a while loop, if you do want it to print it a certain number of times, but you don't know when it's true, or you don't know how to increase it to the next step, then you'll use a while loop instead. And I'll show you guys later on when we get into the more advanced coding, like how to build an app or a game, why or when you'll use a while loop. But for now, the majority of the time, in order to count things, we will use the for loop. So yeah, the for loop people struggle with the most because it has this weird syntax. You have to type in the counter variable, and then you have to type in when the condition and the increment or decrement. And that is sometimes hard for people to remember. And that's okay. You'll be surprised to know how many times professional coders or just advanced coders look up syntax, which is just what to put in here. That's what syntax is. What to put in here, and how to put it. That's just syntax. How many times advanced coders have to look up syntax? And it's just something that all coders will have to do because we can't store everything in here. And that's what the online online resources are for. And if you ever can't remember whole subjects, you can always look at videos like these or other people's YouTube videos. But I encourage you to watch mine because I will have live feedback for you, or just active feedback. So let's review. And I already threw a lot at you today. We have the if, else, and else-if statement. They help the programmer control the path of their code, where it moves into, depending on what's inside the parentheses. The while loop and for loop also take in true and false, or Boolean type operators, or Boolean type variables, in order to repeat things, to repeat code without having to type it all out again. Now, using increments and decrements, the programmer can increase and decrease variables really easily. You can and vary in a short amount of text. Here are some example prompts. We're going to make a variable named password, and we're going to set it to the best password ever. Now we're going to check if that password equals to best password ever. And if it does, print out login successful. This is like the core of a little of login services like Google or YouTube or anything where you got to log in. This is the core of what they do, using control statements, if and else. Oh, and I kind of gave away the answer, but that's okay. This is, the core of that without all the encryption or past security. The second example problem, using the while loop or for loop, count down from 10 to 0 instead and print out those results. So I will give you time now to pause the video and try these out for yourself on codeva.io or any IDE that you know of, and come back when you're ready. Okay, are you guys ready to go over these question problems? Again, I will repeat it again. I do not have the answers prepared beforehand, so you guys will see me solve them live. Okay. So I'm gonna just delete all this stuff. Okay, so let's start. We're gonna create a string variable called password, and we're gonna make it best password ever. Yeah, we're gonna check if it equals best password ever. And if I didn't explain this clearly enough, when you're comparing strings, it's different from when you're comparing numbers. If you want it to say 1 equals 1, you use double equals. But because our compiler works with strings differently, you can't say Bob equals Bob. This will work occasionally. It's really rare when that works. And it's just because of how computers store data, how they manage that data, and how they send it to each other itself, really. And so if we have to use a different function called the dot equals function. If password dot equals best password ever, I have to make sure I spell it correctly, then we're going to do whatever's inside these curly brackets. We're going to print out our system dot out dot print ln out. We're going to do login successful, and remember the semicolon. I gotta remember to do that. Now if it doesn't equal, then we won't get login successful. Now my console is not working for some reason. Let me try it out. We'll see. Yeah, I think the server's just lagging so hard it won't give me an answer. But you should see there login successful, and you can try this for yourself. Hopefully you have better internet than I do, and see the answer. It will equal logins. It will equal, and it will print out login successful. So the next one, using while or for loop. I'm gonna use a for loop so that we can get more used to it. Count down from 10 to 0, and print those results. So for loop. Now, instead of making a counter that starts at 0 and goes up to 10, I'm going to make it start at 10 and go down to 0. And so what does the condition have to be? It can't be less than 10 because it'll never be less than 10. We have to say it's greater than 0. As long as it's greater than 0, it'll do whatever's inside this code. Repeat itself, actually. And instead of counter plus plus, I'm going to have counter minus minus. It'll decrease itself by 1. So, print out system .out.print counter and semicolon. So this will print out, it'll start at 10. Because 10 is greater than 0, it'll print out counter, and then it'll subtract itself by 1. And then it'll go to 9, and then go to 8, and then 7, and then 6, and then 5. All the way down to 1, it'll print out 1, and then it'll go to 0. Now because 0 is not greater than 0, it won't print out 0. It'll just end the loop and go whatever's after. And we don't have anything after. So this one, I don't know if it'll run. Yeah, it won't run. But this is how you count down from 10. And sometimes it is more useful to count down from 10 than it is to go upwards. Like, let's say you're creating a countdown function. You want it to count down before the match starts. You want it to count down from 10 to 0. Then you could do that. Or you could do 3 to 1, or any number you want. You just have to change this number, the starting counter. So those are my example problems. Hopefully they were challenging. Hopefully they weren't too challenging. And I hope you guys enjoyed watching, and please subscribe so you can see when I'm uploading live streams and such. And I will see you guys in the next video.